I arrived at my in-laws' annual 4th of July barbecue, expecting to see my parents mingling with the other guests on the sprawling back patio. Instead, I found 30 relatives I barely knew, clustered around tables, laden with Patricia's famous potato salad and my husband Mark's prized brisket. My stomach dropped as I scanned the crowd twice, searching for familiar faces that weren't there. When I approached my sister-in-law, Diane, near the grill, her smile turned razor sharp. I protested that my family hadn't been invited to the barbecue. I said, confusion bleeding into my voice. Guess the guest list got classier, she replied sweetly. Mark appeared beside her, his face darkening when he saw my expression. Don't like it, there's the door, he snapped loudly enough for everyone to hear. The next morning, I woke up in our king-size bed feeling like a stranger in my own house. Mark had already left for his regional sales director position at Morrison Financial Group, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and a coffee mug stained with yesterday's bitterness. I padded through our suburban Denver home in my bare feet, taking inventory of a life that suddenly felt borrowed rather than built. 7 years of marriage had created routines I'd mistaken for happiness. The granite countertops Mark insisted we needed. The leather furniture his mother Patricia had helped us select. Even the wedding photos lining our hallway showed his family prominently, while mine appeared relegated to the edges, as if they were afterthoughts rather than the people who'd raised me with love and integrity. I pulled my suitcase from the walk-in closet, remembering how Mark had changed after his promotion 2 years earlier. The man who once drove 6 hours to surprise my father on his birthday gradually became someone who rolled his eyes when my mother called. He started referring to family dinners at my childhood home as obligations, rather than the cherished gatherings they'd always been. His own family's wealth had initially seemed irrelevant to our relationship. Mark's parents owned successful real estate development companies throughout Colorado, and his brother Jason ran a construction firm specializing in luxury mountain homes. But somewhere along the way, their acceptance of my working-class background had curdled into barely concealed disdain. I remembered last Christmas when Patricia forgot to set me a place at their formal dining table, forcing me to eat on a folding chair retrieved from the garage. Mark laughed it off as an honest mistake, even though I'd attended the same Christmas dinner for 6 consecutive years. His brother Jason regularly made comments about my parents being simple people who wouldn't understand complex business discussions, while Mark nodded along as if agreeing with some universal truth. But the memory that stung most was discovering Mark had never told his family about my acceptance to University of Denver's law school before we married. I deferred enrollment to support his career ambitions, believing we were building something together. His family still thought I'd dropped out of community college, and Mark had never bothered correcting their assumptions. As I folded clothes into my suitcase, my hands trembled with the weight of accumulated slights I'd convinced myself were misunderstandings. I opened our shared filing cabinet to gather important documents and froze when I discovered credit card statements I'd never seen before. Mark had opened multiple accounts using our joint credit history, maxing out cards with balances totaling over $47,000. The purchases told a story of escalating extravagance designer suits from downtown Denver boutiques, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never visited, and luxury hotel stays during business trips that hadn't seemed necessary for his job. Most shocking were regular cash advances of $500 to $1,500, with no explanation or supporting receipts. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from First National Bank. The customer service representative's voice carried professional sympathy as she delivered news that shattered my remaining illusions about my marriage. Mrs. Patterson, I'm calling about unusual activity on your joint savings account. Yesterday at 3:47 p.m., your husband withdrew the entire balance of $23,412 in cash. Given the amount we wanted to verify, this transaction was authorized by both account holders. The barbecue had started at 2 o'clock. While I stood humiliated in his family's backyard, Mark had been systematically emptying our financial future. The timing wasn't coincidental. He'd orchestrated my exclusion to ensure I couldn't interfere with his theft, turning family cruelty into criminal opportunity. I hung up and continued packing with mechanical precision, my hands steady, despite the emotional earthquake reshaping my understanding of everything I'd believed about my life. The man I'd married, supported, and defended had been planning this betrayal, while I worried about bringing the right side dish to family gatherings that apparently weren't meant to include me anyway. My parents' modest Aurora home felt like sanctuary after the cold perfection of Mark's suburban showcase. Dad answered the door in his electrician's uniform home between service calls and simply opened his arms when he saw my suitcases. Mom emerged from the kitchen wearing scrubs from her nursing shift, took one look at my face, and guided me to the familiar comfort of their worn but spotless living room. They didn't ask questions that first evening. Dad heated up Mom's famous chicken and rice while she made sweet tea in mason jars we'd used for every family celebration since childhood. Their unconditional acceptance reminded me why Mark's family had always felt threatened by the genuine love that filled this small house with warmth their mansion couldn't replicate. My younger brother Tommy arrived after his shift at Data Secure Solutions, a cybersecurity company, where he'd built a reputation for tracking digital financial crimes. At 28, Tommy possessed the quiet confidence of someone who understood technology could reveal truths people tried desperately to hide. When I explained Mark's financial deception, Tommy's jaw tightened with protective anger I hadn't seen since high school bullies learned not to mess with his big sister. "Let me dig into this," Tommy said, pulling out his laptop with the focused intensity that made him successful in his field. "People always leave digital footprints when they're moving money illegally. Mark's not smart enough to cover his tracks completely." Within hours, Tommy had uncovered a financial conspiracy that extended far beyond our joint accounts. Mark had invested our entire savings in something called Crypto Peak Industries, a venture capital fund operated by his brother Jason that promised guaranteed returns of 30% annually. The company's website looked professional, but Tommy's deeper investigation revealed it was essentially a shell operation, designed to funnel family money between Jason's failing construction business and Mark's lifestyle expenses. The cryptocurrency market crashed hard last week. Tommy explained, showing me news articles about failed digital currencies that had cost investors billions. Jason's fund collapsed completely. Every penny people invested is gone, and there's evidence he knew the investments were worthless when he took your money. The next morning brought a phone call that confirmed Mark's desperation had reached pathetic new depths. Patricia's voice carried its usual imperious tone, but I detected underlying panic she couldn't quite mask. "Easter, this childish tantrum needs to stop immediately," she declared without preamble. "Mark made a mistake, but marriages require forgiveness. You're being selfish by abandoning him during difficult circumstances. Our family doesn't air private matters publicly, and we expect you to return home today to support Mark properly." I almost laughed at the audacity. The woman who'd spent years treating me like hired help now demanded I rescue her son from consequences of his own criminal behavior. "Patricia, Mark stole our life savings and lied to me for months. I won't be returning to enable his continued deception." "You're overreacting to normal financial disagreements," she insisted. "Successful couples work through these challenges together instead of running home to mommy and daddy like spoiled children." The irony of her calling me spoiled while demanding I subsidize her adult son's lifestyle wasn't lost on me. I ended the call feeling lighter than I had in years. That afternoon, I contacted Rachel Morrison, a law school friend who'd graduated summa cum laude and built a thriving family law practice in downtown Denver. Rachel had always possessed the sharp intelligence and unwavering integrity that made her natural advocate for people facing divorce and financial abuse. "Easter. I can't tell you how glad I am that you called," Rachel said when we met at her impressive office overlooking the Colorado State Capitol. "I've been hoping we'd reconnect under better circumstances, but I'm honored you trust me to help you through this situation." She offered me a paralegal position that would provide steady income while I figured out my next steps. More importantly, she agreed to represent me pro bono after learning the extent of Mark's financial crimes. But Rachel's next revelation showed how thoroughly Mark had betrayed not just our marriage, but basic legal and ethical boundaries. "Easter, I need to tell you something that's going to shock you," she said, her expression grave. Mark has been calling law firms throughout Denver asking about protecting assets during divorce proceedings. He's been shopping for attorneys who specialize in hiding money from spouses during dissolution proceedings. But there's something else. You're listed as co-owner of Jason's construction company, Patterson Brothers Development. Your signature appears on incorporation documents filed 18 months ago. My blood turned ice cold. I'd never signed any business documents or agreed to become involved in Jason's company. I'd never even visited his office or attended company meetings. The signature on the incorporation papers might look like mine, but I knew with absolute certainty I'd never written it. Mark forged my signature. I whispered the full scope of his betrayal finally becoming clear. He made me legally responsible for debts I never agreed to take on. Rachel nodded grimly. Patterson Brothers Development owes over $200,000 in unpaid contractor fees, supplier costs, and IRS penalties for payroll tax violations. As co-owner, you're personally liable for every penny unless we can prove fraud. The room spun as I realized Mark hadn't just stolen my savings. He deliberately entangled me in his family's criminal enterprise, creating legal liability that could destroy my financial future even after divorce. This wasn't betrayal. This was calculated destruction designed to ensure I could never fully escape his control. Rachel's investigation into the forged documents revealed a level of premeditation that turned my stomach. Security footage from Pinnacle Notary Services showed Mark visiting twice in January of the previous year. The first visit lasted 43 minutes, during which he practiced writing my signature on blank paper while studying copies of my driver's license and credit cards. The second visit, 3 days later, showed him confidently signing incorporation documents as Easter Marie Patterson with fluidity that came from extensive rehearsal. The notary, Mrs. Helen Gutierrez, remembered the transaction clearly when Rachel interviewed her. Mr. Patterson said his wife couldn't attend due to work commitments, but had pre-signed the documents. I asked for identification, and he showed me her driver's license, claiming she'd forgotten to take it to work. The signature looked consistent with the license, so I notarized the papers. Mark had stolen my driver's license for 3 days, telling me he'd found it in his jacket pocket after I supposedly dropped it. I'd been grateful for his helpfulness instead of questioning how my license ended up in his possession. But document forgery was only the beginning of Mark's identity theft crimes. Rachel's paralegal discovered Mark had used my stolen identity to apply for business credit cards, secure equipment loans for Jason's company, and even obtain a second mortgage on our house that I'd never authorized or signed. The mortgage money had disappeared into the same cryptocurrency scheme that consumed our savings. He's been systematically using your credit and legal identity to prop up his family's failing businesses, Rachel explained during an emergency meeting at her office. Every document we've examined contains forged signatures, fraudulent addresses, and false income information. This isn't marital financial disagreement. This is organized criminal activity. Mark's family responded to our investigation by hiring Blackstone and Associates, Denver's most expensive white-collar defense firm. Patricia liquidated investment accounts to pay their retainer, while Jason threatened me directly during a confrontation outside my parents' house. "You're destroying an entire family over money." Jason snarled, his face flushed with rage and desperation. "Mark made mistakes, but you're supposed to support your husband through difficult times. Instead, you're acting like some vindictive ex-wife trying to ruin innocent people." The projection was breathtaking. Jason had orchestrated fraudulent investments that stole money from multiple victims, yet somehow I was the villain for refusing to accept responsibility for crimes I never committed. His entitlement reflected the same arrogance that allowed Mark to forge my signature while believing I'd never challenge his authority. Tommy's cybersecurity expertise uncovered the most devastating betrayal yet. Mark had been conducting an affair with Diane's younger sister, Crystal, for 8 months, using our stolen savings to fund romantic getaways and expensive gifts. Crystal's social media posts showed designer jewelry spa weekends in Aspen and intimate dinners at restaurants Mark claimed were business meetings. More painfully, Crystal was telling friends and coworkers that Mark planned to divorce me after securing his financial position. She'd been posting photos captioned with references to new beginnings and love winning over obstacles. The obstacles apparently were me and the marriage Mark had been systematically destroying while publicly maintaining the pretense of committed partnership. Crystal's pregnancy announcement on social media included subtle hints about timing and planned surprises, suggesting she believed Mark would leave me to start their family together. Comments from her friends congratulated her on finally getting the man she deserved and expressed excitement about the wedding they'd all been waiting for. I felt sick reading evidence that Mark had been planning our divorce while stealing money to finance his new relationship. Every intimate moment of our marriage had been performed under false pretenses, while he built a future with someone else using resources he'd stolen from our joint financial foundation. My phone rang at 11:30 on a Thursday night, Mark's name appearing on the caller ID for the first time since I'd left. His voice carried panic I'd never heard before, desperation that stripped away his usual confident manipulation. "Easter, we need to talk immediately. Something terrible has happened, and I need you to come home tonight." "I'm not coming home, Mark. Whatever crisis you've created for yourself doesn't require my involvement." The FBI raided Jason's office and my workplace today. Federal agents seized computers, financial records, and client files. They're investigating tax evasion, fraud, and money laundering. I need you to provide an alibi for specific dates when major financial transactions occurred. This is serious, Easter. People could go to prison. The irony was staggering. Mark was begging me to lie to federal investigators to protect him from consequences of crimes he'd committed using my stolen identity. He still believed he could manipulate me into saving him even after destroying our marriage and stealing our future. "Mark, I know about the forged signatures, the stolen savings, and your affair with Crystal. I know you made me legally responsible for Jason's debts without my knowledge or consent. I'm not providing alibis for crimes you committed while betraying everything about our marriage." "Is this your doing?" He demanded, his panic transforming into accusatory rage. "Did you contact federal authorities about private family financial matters? Are you trying to send your own husband to prison over marriage problems that could be resolved with counseling?" Even facing federal prosecution, Mark couldn't accept responsibility for his choices. In his mind, I'd somehow orchestrated his downfall instead of simply refusing to remain silent about his criminal behavior. The question revealed how completely he'd misjudged my character and underestimated my intelligence. I hung up feeling profound relief that this man would soon be entirely removed from my life. FBI Special Agent Sarah Collins possessed the sharp professionalism of someone who'd spent 15 years investigating white-collar crimes. Her downtown Denver office overlooked the federal courthouse, where Mark would eventually face justice, and her direct manner immediately put me at ease during our first interview. "Mrs. Patterson, you're not under investigation," Agent Collins clarified, before I could worry about needing legal representation. "We've been monitoring Patterson Brothers' development for 18 months, following complaints from elderly investors who lost retirement savings in fraudulent construction projects. Your husband's financial activities came to our attention as part of that broader investigation." She explained that Jason's construction company had been selling shares in luxury mountain home developments that existed only on paper. Investors received professional brochures showing architect renderings and construction timelines for exclusive resort communities that were never built. Mark had used his position at Morrison Financial Group to identify wealthy clients approaching retirement, then directed them toward Jason's fake investment opportunities in exchange for substantial commission payments. "We have recorded conversations between your husband and brother-in-law discussing which investors were most vulnerable to high-pressure sales tactics. Agent Collins continued. They specifically targeted people with substantial retirement accounts who trusted Mark's expertise in financial planning. The most shocking revelation involved Crystal's role in the investigation. Far from being Mark's devoted girlfriend planning their future together, Crystal had been cooperating with federal investigators for 4 months in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Her affair with Mark had been partially genuine, but became an intelligence-gathering operation when FBI agents approached her after discovering her involvement in laundering money through her photography business. Crystal provided recordings of Mark admitting to forging your signature on business documents, Agent Collins explained. She documented his confession about stealing your joint savings to cover Jason's investment losses. We also have evidence of Mark coaching her about providing false testimony if federal investigators questioned their relationship. Crystal's pregnancy was fiction designed to pressure Mark into leaving me quickly so they could disappear together before federal charges were filed. She'd been feeding Mark false confidence about their future while secretly recording conversations that would ensure his conviction. The scope of Mark's deception was breathtaking. He told federal investigators that I was the financial mastermind behind fraudulent activities, claiming I controlled business decisions for Patterson Brothers Development and authorized all major financial transactions. Mark had provided forged documents supposedly proving I directed investment strategy and supervised construction project funding. Your husband attempted to make you the primary suspect in this investigation, Agent Collins said with obvious disgust. If Crystal hadn't been recording his admissions of forgery and theft, you might have faced serious federal charges for crimes you had no knowledge of. Only Crystal's evidence and my cooperation with investigators proved my innocence. Mark's strategy of using me as a scapegoat had backfired spectacularly when his affair partner became the prosecution's star witness against him. Meanwhile, Mark's professional life disintegrated as thoroughly as his criminal schemes. Morrison Financial Group fired him immediately after discovering he'd embezzled over $35,000 from client accounts to cover Jason's business losses. His colleagues learned that Mark had violated fiduciary responsibilities by steering clients toward investments that benefited his family while destroying their retirement security. Patricia mortgaged the family mansion to pay legal fees for both Mark and Jason, liquidating decades of real estate profits to fund their defense against overwhelming federal evidence. The criminal charges included mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and racketeering conspiracy. Mark faced up to 25 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. In desperation, Mark moved back into his childhood bedroom in Patricia's house, a 34-year-old man sleeping surrounded by high school football trophies, while federal agents prepared to destroy his freedom permanently. Diane filed for divorce when she discovered her husband had been funneling money through their accounts to hide Jason's illegal activities, and their marriage became another casualty of the family's criminal enterprise. The most heartbreaking conversation of my life came when elderly victims started contacting me directly after learning about Mark's arrest from news coverage. Agnes Murphy, a 79-year-old retired elementary school teacher, called crying about losing her entire life savings of $67,000 to Jason's fake construction project. "Your husband seemed so trustworthy and knowledgeable," Agnes said through tears. "He showed me pictures of the beautiful mountain homes and promised I'd receive monthly income payments that would supplement my pension. I trusted him because he worked for a reputable financial company and spoke so confidently about construction industry opportunities." Agnes had emptied her 401k retirement account and sold her late husband's life insurance policy to invest in Jason's non-existent development projects. At nearly 80 years old, she faced poverty because Mark had exploited her trust in financial expertise he'd used to destroy her security. Similar calls came from other victims: a widowed father who'd invested his children's college funds, a disabled veteran who'd trusted Mark with his compensation settlement, and a retired couple who'd liquidated their small business to buy shares in luxury condominiums that would never be built. Each conversation reinforced that Mark's crimes had devastated innocent people who'd trusted his professional credentials and apparent integrity. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd destroyed the financial security of dozens of hard-working Americans who'd spent lifetimes building modest wealth he'd stolen in months. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver buzzed with media attention as Mark's trial began on a crisp October morning. I wore my best Navy suit, the one I'd purchased for job interviews during happier times, when I'd believed in building a respectable career alongside my supportive husband. Now I was testifying against that same man to ensure justice for the people he'd victimized through years of calculated fraud. Mark's defense attorneys from Blackstone and Associates had crafted a strategy painting me as equally culpable in the financial crimes, suggesting I'd been an active participant who only turned against my husband when our schemes were discovered. Lead attorney Jonathan Carmichael questioned me with sneering condescension, implying I was lying to save myself from prosecution. "Mrs. Patterson, isn't it true that you benefited financially from the luxury lifestyle your husband provided through these alleged crimes?" Carmichael asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "I benefited from believing my husband was honest and successful," I replied steadily. "I didn't know he was stealing from elderly investors to pay for dinners I thought he earned through legitimate work." "You expect this court to believe you had no knowledge of your husband's business activities, despite being married for 7 years. "I expect this court to believe I trusted my husband when he said he was working hard to provide for our future. "I didn't investigate every financial transaction because I thought we were building something together honestly." The prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Crystal's recordings played Mark's voice admitting to forging my signature and stealing our savings. Bank records showed systematic theft from our joint accounts to cover Jason's failing investments. Video surveillance proved Mark had practiced my signature before fraudulently signing legal documents that made me liable for hundreds of thousands in business debts. Most damaging was Mark's own testimony, where his arrogance and lack of remorse alienated even his expensive defense team. Under cross-examination, Mark insisted he'd been protecting family interests and claimed his clients had been sophisticated investors who understood risks involved in construction development opportunities. Federal prosecutor Amanda Chen methodically destroyed Mark's justifications with victim impact statements that filled the courtroom with quiet sobbing. Agnes Murphy testified about eating meals of crackers and canned soup because Mark had stolen her retirement savings. The disabled veteran described losing his apartment because he couldn't pay rent after investing his disability settlement in Jason's non-existent construction projects. Mark showed no emotion during victim testimony, maintaining the same entitled coldness that had characterized his treatment of my family during our marriage. His complete lack of empathy confirmed that the man I'd loved had never truly existed. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: 16 counts of mail fraud, 8 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and tax evasion. Judge Margaret Thornfield sentenced Mark to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised probation and full restitution to victims totaling over $400,000. "Mr. Patterson, your crimes demonstrate a callous disregard for the financial security of vulnerable people who trusted your professional expertise," Judge Thornfield said during sentencing. "You exploited elderly Americans who worked their entire lives to build modest retirement savings, and you showed no remorse for destroying their dignity along with their financial futures." Mark was led away in handcuffs while Patricia sobbed in the gallery. Crystal, granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, avoided eye contact as federal marshals escorted Mark toward the beginning of his well-deserved punishment. With Mark's conviction secured, I used my settlement from the identity theft case to rent a small but bright apartment in downtown Denver's Art District. The space was barely 800 square feet, but every inch belonged to me, without contamination from lies, manipulation, or stolen money. I furnished it slowly with pieces chosen for comfort rather than status, creating a sanctuary that reflected my authentic values instead of someone else's image requirements. Rachel's paralegal position provided steady income, while I returned to law school part-time, pursuing the legal education I deferred to support Mark's career aspirations. University of Denver welcomed me back with academic scholarships, recognizing both my undergraduate achievements and my unique perspective on white-collar crime victimization. I specialized in financial fraud law and victim advocacy driven by deep empathy for people who'd suffered betrayals, similar to mine. My first major case involved representing Agnes Murphy and 7 other elderly victims in civil litigation against Mark's family for conspiracy and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The civil case revealed the full extent of Patricia and Jason's knowledge about Mark's criminal activities. Discovery documents showed Patricia had kept detailed records of meetings where the family planned to use me as a scapegoat if federal investigations began. Email exchanges between Jason and Mark discussed strategies for protecting family assets by making me legally responsible for business debts I never authorized. Most shocking was evidence that the barbecue exclusion had been their final attempt to isolate me before Mark's arrest. Patricia's planning documents explicitly stated they needed to distance Easter from family activities before financial difficulties required difficult decisions about protecting legitimate business interests. The family had orchestrated my humiliation as preparation for framing me for their crimes. Every slight, every insult, every moment of exclusion had been calculated steps toward destroying my credibility if I ever discovered their criminal conspiracy. Civil court awarded substantial damages against Mark's family for conspiracy fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Patricia lost her mansion and most remaining assets to pay the $215,000 judgment. Jason declared bankruptcy after his construction company folded completely, leaving him homeless and unemployable in Denver's tight-knit construction industry. Diane received an uncontested divorce and custody of her children after proving she'd been unaware of her husband's involvement in the financial crimes. She moved back to California with her parents grateful to escape the toxic dysfunction that had consumed Mark's family for years. I used the civil settlement money to complete law school without debt and establish the Agnes Murphy Victim Advocacy Fund, a nonprofit organization providing legal assistance to elderly Americans targeted by financial fraud schemes. The fund's mission statement hung framed in my new office, protecting the dignity and security of hardworking people who trusted the wrong professionals with their life savings. Crystal made several attempts to reconnect with me after Mark's conviction, claiming she'd always admired my strength and insisting she'd only cooperated with federal investigators to protect innocent victims like myself. Her manipulation techniques were identical to Mark's false intimacy, manufactured vulnerability, and strategic positioning as someone who understood my perspective better than anyone else. Easter. I know you probably hate me, but I want you to understand that my feelings for Mark were real at first, Crystal said during an unwelcome visit to my apartment. I genuinely cared about him until I realized how he was using me to hurt you and those elderly clients. That's why I started recording our conversations. I was trying to gather evidence to help you. The audacity was breathtaking. Crystal had participated in money laundering, maintained an affair that devastated my marriage, and lied about pregnancy to manipulate Mark into leaving me faster. Now she wanted credit for cooperating with authorities only after realizing she'd face prosecution herself. Crystal, I appreciate your cooperation with the investigation, but I'm not interested in a friendship based on shared victimization by the same manipulative man. I hope you build an honest life for yourself, but that life won't include me. Her manufactured pregnancy had been the most cynical aspect of her deception. Crystal had never been expecting Mark's child. She'd simply recognized that claims of pregnancy would pressure Mark into making decisive moves about our marriage, while providing her with apparent leverage for securing his long-term commitment. When Mark learned about the false pregnancy from federal agents during interrogation, he finally understood how completely Crystal had manipulated him. She'd played him as expertly as he'd played me, using his own tactics against him to serve law enforcement purposes. My law school graduation ceremony took place on a gorgeous May afternoon at the University of Denver's historic campus. Dad arrived wearing his best suit, the one he'd purchased for my wedding 7 years earlier, but never worn since. Mom brought fresh flowers from her garden and tears of pride that reminded me how much genuine love I'd sacrificed to chase Mark's conditional approval. Tommy flew back from a cybersecurity conference in Seattle to watch me receive the Dean's Award for Pro Bono service, recognizing my work helping fraud victims through the Advocacy Fund. During the ceremony, Agnes Murphy, now 82 and fully recovered financially, thanks to civil litigation victories, presented me with a hand-knitted blanket featuring the Colorado state flower. "You saved my life in ways that go far beyond money." Agnes said, her voice steady despite emotional tears. "You showed me that being betrayed doesn't mean being broken. You taught me that fighting back is always possible, even when you feel too old and tired to keep trying." Her words captured everything I hoped to achieve through victim advocacy work, restoring people's faith in their own strength while providing practical tools for rebuilding after financial devastation. I started dating David Chen, a fellow attorney who volunteered at legal aid clinics serving immigrant communities. David's approach to relationships was everything Mark's had never been: transparent communication, genuine interest in my goals and opinions, and complete respect for my autonomy and decision-making authority. Our relationship developed slowly through shared volunteer work and long conversations about using legal careers to serve people who needed advocates most. David admired my journey from betrayal victim to successful attorney without ever treating my experience as entertainment or expecting me to perform gratitude for his acceptance of my history. "You've turned terrible pain into beautiful purpose," David said during one of our early dinner dates. "That kind of transformation requires incredible strength and character. I'm honored that you trust me to be part of your life while you're building something so meaningful." Mark's letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 18 months into his federal prison sentence. The envelope bore the return address of FCI Englewood, a medium security facility where white-collar criminals serve time alongside drug dealers and financial fraudsters. His handwriting looked exactly the same, as if incarceration hadn't changed his fundamental character or perspective on his crimes. "Dearest Easter." The letter began with characteristic manipulation. "I've spent countless hours in prayer and reflection, and God has opened my heart to the terrible mistakes I made during our marriage. I found Jesus Christ as my personal Savior, and I understand now that I hurt you and those innocent clients because I lost sight of what truly mattered in life." The religious conversion narrative felt as fraudulent as everything else Mark had ever told me. Prison chaplains later confirmed that Mark attended services primarily to impress parole board officials rather than from genuine spiritual transformation. His letters to other inmates, intercepted during routine mail monitoring, showed him operating gambling schemes and attempting to recruit partners for financial crimes he planned to commit after release. Most disturbing was his assumption that I was waiting for him and planning to provide financial support for his fresh start after prison. Mark had been telling other inmates that his wife was a successful attorney who would help him reestablish himself in Denver's business community. He apparently believed our marriage could resume where it left off, as if federal conviction and imprisonment were temporary inconveniences rather than consequences of fundamental character flaws. "I know I have to earn your forgiveness through actions rather than words." Mark's letter continued. "I'm prepared to spend however many years are necessary proving that I've changed and that our love can overcome the mistakes that drove us apart. I've learned that money means nothing compared to having someone who truly understands and accepts you." The irony was staggering. Mark still believed he could manipulate me into resuming our relationship by claiming personal growth he'd never actually achieved. Even from prison, he was attempting to rewrite history by characterizing criminal fraud as mistakes and presenting himself as someone who deserved forgiveness rather than the consequences he'd earned through years of calculated deception. I threw the letter away without finishing it, feeling nothing but relief that steel bars and concrete walls prevented Mark from attempting more direct manipulation. 3 years after Mark's conviction, I stood in my own law office overlooking downtown Denver's bustling financial district. The walls displayed thank you letters from clients who'd recovered life savings through my representation, framed newspaper articles about successful fraud prosecutions, and photographs from legal conferences where I'd spoken about protecting vulnerable populations from financial predators. The Agnes Murphy Victim Advocacy Fund had grown into Colorado's premier resource for elderly Americans targeted by investment fraud. We'd helped recover over $2 million for victims, while successfully prosecuting dozens of criminals who preyed on retiree communities throughout the Mountain West region. My practice specialized in representing people who'd trusted financial professionals with their most precious assets, retirement security children's college funds, and lifetime savings accounts built through decades of careful planning. Every client's story echoed my own experience of discovering that someone they'd trusted completely had been systematically destroying their financial future while maintaining facades of competence and integrity. Agnes Murphy, now 85, and sharp as ever, served on our advisory board and spoke regularly at senior community centers about recognizing financial fraud warning signs. Her presentations combined practical advice with inspirational testimony about rebuilding after devastating betrayal. I learned that being a victim once doesn't mean staying a victim forever. Agnes would tell audiences of concerned seniors, Easter showed me that fighting back is possible at any age and that helping other people avoid similar pain can transform your worst experience into your greatest purpose. David and I married on a perfect autumn afternoon in my parents' backyard, surrounded by the people who'd supported me through my darkest moments and celebrated my victories without reservation. Dad walked me down the same garden path where I'd learned to ride bicycles and climb trees past the rose bushes Mom had planted when Tommy and I were children. Our wedding was everything my first ceremony hadn't been: authentic, intimate, and focused on commitment rather than performance. David's vows spoke about partnership, respect, and building something together that honored both our individual dreams and shared values. Mine promised honesty, loyalty, and the courage to keep growing together through whatever challenges life presented. Mark had been denied early parole after prison officials discovered he'd been operating illegal gambling operations among inmates and attempting to recruit accomplices for financial schemes he planned to execute after release. His lack of genuine remorse and continued criminal behavior ensured he'd serve his full 8-year sentence in federal custody. I felt no satisfaction in Mark's continued punishment, only relief that he remained unable to harm other innocent people. Prison hadn't reformed him or taught him empathy for his victims. It had simply contained his destructive impulses while providing him with new opportunities to practice manipulation and exploitation. Crystal had moved to Portland and was reportedly working as a medical office assistant under her maiden name, having struggled to find employment after her role in Mark's crimes became public knowledge. Her cooperation with federal authorities had saved her from prosecution, but hadn't protected her from the professional and social consequences of participating in financial fraud schemes. Patricia lost her mansion and most family assets to pay legal fees and civil judgments. She moved into a modest apartment near Jason, who worked construction jobs under supervision since his own criminal conviction for conspiracy and tax evasion. The family's real estate empire had crumbled, completely destroyed by the same greed and entitlement that had made their criminal activities seem acceptable to them. But the most meaningful transformation belonged to me. I discovered that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation or continued vulnerability to people who'd shown their true character through sustained, harmful actions. I'd forgiven Mark for my own peace of mind while maintaining healthy boundaries that protected me from future manipulation. True strength wasn't avoiding betrayal, which was impossible in a world where trust was necessary for meaningful relationships. True strength was refusing to let betrayal define my worth or limit my potential for building something better from the rubble of destroyed illusions. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, the healthiest response is believing them and responding accordingly. Mark had shown me he was someone who would steal, lie, and manipulate without remorse to serve his own interests. Accepting that truth had freed me to build relationships with people who demonstrated integrity through their choices rather than just their words. The greatest victory against people who try to diminish you isn't revenge or punishment. It's building a life of purpose and authenticity that helps other people heal from similar wounds while creating meaning from pain that could have destroyed you completely. I'd found my calling through betrayal, transforming personal devastation into professional dedication that protected countless vulnerable Americans from financial predators. Every client I represented, every fraud scheme I helped unravel, and every victim who recovered their dignity, along with their money, proved that terrible experiences could become foundations for beautiful purpose. Agnes Murphy visited my office regularly, bringing fresh cookies and updates about her great-grandchildren who were thriving thanks to the college funds her recovered savings had restored. At 85, she'd become one of Colorado's most effective advocates for elderly financial protection, speaking with authority earned through surviving and overcoming devastating betrayal. "You know what I learned through all of this?" Agnes said during one of our afternoon conversations. "The people who try to break us usually end up showing us exactly how strong we really are. Mark thought he was destroying your future, but he actually freed you to discover what you were truly capable of accomplishing." Her wisdom captured the profound truth of my journey. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you ever build. My phone rang as I was reviewing case files for the next day's depositions. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was painfully familiar. "Easter, this is Mark. I'm calling from a supervised phone at the prison to let you know I'll be released in 14 months. I wanted to give you time to prepare for my return to Denver so we can begin the process of rebuilding our relationship and moving forward together." I almost hung up immediately, but curiosity about his continued delusion kept me listening. "I've spent 5 years reflecting on our marriage and taking responsibility for my actions. I understand now that I made serious mistakes, and I'm prepared to spend however long it takes earning your forgiveness and proving that I've changed fundamentally as a person." The manipulation was as transparent as ever. Mark still believed he could convince me to resume our relationship by claiming personal growth, that his continued criminal behavior in prison proved was fictional. Even after everything, he couldn't conceive of a world where his actions had permanent consequences that couldn't be undone through charm and false promises. "Mark, I need you to understand something very clearly," I said with the calm authority I'd developed through years of legal practice. "I'm not waiting for you. I'm not interested in rebuilding anything with you. I've built a successful life that doesn't include you, and your release from prison won't change that reality." "You can't mean that, Easter. We have too much history together, too much love that can't just disappear because of temporary problems that are behind us now. Our history consists of you stealing my money, forging my signature, and planning to frame me for your crimes while conducting an affair. That's not love, Mark. That's abuse, and I won't subject myself to it again." I hung up and blocked the number, then called Agnes to share the conversation that had reminded me how far I'd traveled from the woman who'd once accepted cruelty disguised as love. "Some people never learn," Agnes laughed. "But their failure to grow doesn't diminish what we've accomplished by refusing to stay stuck in their version of our story." That evening, David and I walked through downtown Denver's vibrant arts district, past the galleries and restaurants that had replaced old warehouses with creative energy and community gathering spaces. The city had grown and changed during the years I'd been rebuilding my life, just as I'd grown into someone stronger and more purposeful than I'd ever imagined possible. "Do you ever regret how everything happened?" David asked as we paused outside the building where I'd rented my first apartment after leaving Mark. "I regret the pain Mark caused his victims," I replied thoughtfully. "I regret that people like Agnes had to suffer because of his greed and my naivety. But I don't regret discovering who he really was before I wasted more years enabling his destruction." The woman who'd stood humiliated at that 4th of July barbecue seemed like a different person now, someone I remembered with compassion but no longer identified with completely. She'd been trapped by fear of disappointing people who didn't value her anyway, sacrificing her authentic self to maintain relationships built on her diminishment. I'd learned that love without respect is manipulation, that financial control is emotional abuse, and that people who truly care about you don't systematically isolate you from sources of support and validation. Most importantly, I'd learned that staying in harmful situations doesn't demonstrate loyalty or commitment. It demonstrates confusion about your own worth and what you deserve from life. The evening sky painted Denver's mountains in shades of purple and gold as David and I headed home to the life we'd built together through honest communication, mutual respect, and shared commitment to helping people who needed advocates willing to fight for justice. Tomorrow I'd represent 3 new clients who'd been victimized by financial fraud schemes, continuing work that transformed my worst experience into my greatest source of purpose and meaning. Agnes would stop by with cookies and updates about her great-grandchildren. Rachel and I would strategize about expanding legal services for elderly fraud victims throughout Colorado. Mark would remain in prison for 14 more months, still believing he could manipulate his way back into relevance in my life. Patricia would continue paying the consequences of enabling her son's criminal behavior. Crystal would keep rebuilding her reputation while living with knowledge that she'd participated in destroying innocent people's financial security. But I would continue building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, proving every day that terrible experiences could become foundations for extraordinary purpose when you refuse to let them define your limits. After everything that happened, I've learned that sometimes the people who try hardest to break us end up revealing exactly how strong we really are. Mark thought he was destroying my future, but he actually freed me to discover what I was truly capable of building. Have you ever faced a situation where someone's betrayal actually led you to discover your own strength? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding purpose through adversity. Share this with someone who might need a reminder that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something even better. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond when life tests your resilience.